Right. Hello, everybody. Thanks for waiting for like 10 minutes. So, okay, Diego is also here. First of all, I would like to say welcome to everybody who is attending right now. My name is Caner. I'm the Vice President of Istanbul Aydın University Translation Club, and today we are going to hold an event about game localization with my dearest guest Diego Perez. So first of all, I would like to say thanks again for Diego Perez. We were talking about doing this for a pretty long time, maybe more than months, and finally we are doing it. So how are you, Diego?
Hi everyone, I'm doing great. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Kenir, and the whole Istanbul Aydin University Translation Club for this extraordinary opportunity to talk about game localization in such a multicultural environment.
hmm we are also thankful for you. So if you want, we can start the event slowly. And firstly, we can maybe start with you maybe want to introduce yourself to people like who are you, what do you do, where do you study, and these kind of questions. Then I will start to ask some kind of questions, and feel free to ask any kind of questions on the chat. We will be reading it, and yeah, we can start.
Thank you. Well, my name is Jacob Perez. I've been working with game localization for almost 7 years now. I've worked on all kinds of game titles, from mobile to AAA titles such as Final Fantasy VII Remake, StarCraft Remastered, Far Cry 6 most recently, and also many others. And game localization is really my passion, is what I enjoy doing the most and what I do best as well. So I think that's it.
Okay, perfect. So you talked about that you actually translated pretty much games, and since it's actually about the game localization, my first question is going to be that how did you find that you have an interest in game localization? Like, were you playing games before, and like, how did you discover that you are actually interested in this topic?
Well, games have been my passion since I was really young, right? Back in the 90s, Portuguese localization was not common. So I started learning English by myself with the help of a good dictionary and my brother, who was fluent by that time. And so he would advise me on some words, structures. And I remember when the game session was over and I couldn't play anymore, I would start recalling the words I had learned that day. And sometimes I even spoke to myself with my broken English at the time and imagining stories. And translation was not my first option. I graduated, I forgot to mention that, I graduated on language and literature from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And when I graduated, translation was not my first option, but I started to do that to really make a living out of it. And I translated user manuals, product descriptions, and other technical material. Mm. It never occurred to me that I could be translating games until a friend of mine told me about, mentioned an acquaintance that had been localizing games for synthesis, which was a very large localization agency back then that has since been acquired by Keywords. So I started looking for some agencies and sending out some CVs and doing some translation tests until I finally started working with it, and I never stopped since.
It's perfect, actually. And so, were you also like, were you still studying when you started to be like in the like started your career as a game localizationist? Like, were you still studying or?
No, I had already completed my studies. I started translating when I was in university for some
hmm
colleagues who were reading some academic papers and things like that. But then Game localization, I started doing after about 1 or 2 years. I think 2 years after graduating.
Hmm. So perfect. And like you talk about actually a good topic, and I would like to also mention and ask about when you say a game localizationist or like game localization specialist, like what kind of job opportunities do they have, or like where do they work? I mean, do we have like special places for localizationists, or like where they work, or like freelance, what they do?
Sure. The best opportunity is for anyone who is starting out or is looking for a steady income in game localization is definitely looking out for agencies, right? You can find those translation agencies on proz.com's Blue Board. Proz is like a portal of translators that has been around for, I don't know, decades, for as long as I can remember, and that's where most professional translators hang out. There's some kind of forum where you can ask questions about specific terms and suggest glossaries and contribute to the community. And you have and this Blue Board dimension is like a database of agencies that have registered in ProZ, right?
Hmm.
So you can look at this database and search the translation agencies, access their websites, and look for a career page or a work with us page to see if they are actively recruiting, right? And the same thing can be said for LinkedIn.
Hmm.
You can search for colleagues in your language pair, for example, or maybe HR professionals from these translation agencies, and look where they work, and do the same thing. You can access their web pages to see if they are recruiting, and send your CV and hope for the best, of course.
Yeah, and I also have actually, since we're talking about job opportunities, I would like to also ask, how are the job possibilities or opportunities for game localizationists? Like, is it hard to find a job for real? And maybe you can also answer it under the like maybe Brazilian Portuguese, English, or maybe if you have knowledge about like on global, maybe you can also answer like that. Like, is it hard, or like what do you think?
Well, I'd say that the game localization industry is expanding at a very fast pace. I don't know, maybe hundreds or thousands of new games are
Mhm.
released each year for mobile, console, and PC platforms. And today, game publishers are also more conscious of the marketing benefits of having their games localized for a specific audience. You can also see new agencies being established and popping out by former employees of larger agencies and also more traditional translation agencies.
Mhm.
And, and also, to me, that's a sign of growth in the industry, right? That said, I would say the market is becoming more competitive because, let's face it, translating games from the comfort of your home office is really an exciting opportunity for many gamers and linguists out there. Brazilian Portuguese, I would say, is expanding even more because the Brazilian Portuguese also is played by people in Europe, like from
Mhm.
European Portuguese and elsewhere. And also the population in Brazil is just so huge, like 200 million people. And and localizing into Brazilian Portuguese has become some of a priority for for many publishers out there, especially when localizing text, which is of course cheaper than localizing audio, right?
Mhm. Yeah, actually, you are right, and it may also may show some differences toward languages. Maybe it may not be the same with Turkish or any kind of languages. And I also saw one question on the chat, and it says, "Do you usually work as freelancer?" And I would like to also
Yeah.
ask about have you ever had a chance to work on an agency and like which one do you prefer and like freelance or agency, what do you prefer?
I work as freelance. I've
Hmm.
never was employed to work in a translation agency, and I believe most people don't actually. Most people work as freelance because I'd say that happens because the demand for work is so irregular, right? So I
Hmm.
think it's there's been a time like decades ago that some agencies actually broke because they have uh, translators in their payroll, but they couldn't afford them anymore because the demand was just oscillating, right? So I'd say most people work as freelance uh, right now.
Hmm. Okay.
I prefer working as freelance because you can actually choose where you work, the kind of projects that interest you, right? So of
Hmm.
course you have to be available for a project that you commit to, right? So if you say you can participate in a project, it's not nice to just leave in the middle of the project because the demand just got higher from other agencies,
Hmm.
right? So, but I do prefer it that way because you can actually schedule your own time and look for agencies with better opportunities as well or more interesting projects, of course.
Hmm. I think I also agree that freelance, I mean, working as a freelancer for game localization is better. Like you say, you had a choice for like you had a chance to choose what you are going to work. And also, I don't know what you think, but working on home is, I think, like better than working on an office or agency for me. I mean, it's really dependable person actually, like person by person, but I would prefer working on home. So I definitely agree with you. And about job, can you like do you have? I mean, actually, I can ask like this: what was the most excited job you have as a game localizationist? Like, do you have any example that you can give, or like which was the you can say like it was a like great experience for me?
Well, maybe I'd say StarCraft Remastered, maybe because it was I was still maybe starting out with 2 or 3 years of experience, and I just got so excited to when I knew I'd get the chance to work with that, and it was also a small team of maybe 3 or 4 people, and they were great to work with. They were really friends, and we are so excited with the whole opportunity that we really gave our best, and we had a lot of support from the publisher too to do a great localization. So I would say this game in particular.
Okay. And how was the how do you say feedbacks to you? I mean, uh, like did they like you or how was the next step for your career? Like what happened next?
Well, the next step was it's really hard to think because the feedback was good, right? I had we just had a great care to respect the what the community was expecting from that localization because it's such a well-established franchise, and it's
Hmm.
also a remaster of a classic game that was released in the 90s. But I believe we did a great job with that from the reviews I got to check, and also from what the publisher said themselves along the project. So the next project was really fighting other titles that had inspired me as a
Hmm.
child, right? Final Fantasy was one of them that I got to work like some years later, and some others that unfortunately I can mention because of NDA reasons. But
Hmm.
these games in particular, I can mention, and they were really the high points of my career so far, no doubt.
Yeah, I mean, it could be a really great feeling to translating the game that you were playing when you're like you were little and the game that you were loving so much. And I mean, it's a pretty good feeling when I'm thinking about it. And I mean, you were lucky
Yeah,
also, and I would like to say congratulations too.
thank you. Yeah, it is because if someone told me that when I was a child that someday I'll be translated that game, I'll never believe it. And I never believed it was even possible. But it happened, and I'm really glad. And thank you for congratulating me on that too.
Yeah, and there's some questions on the chat I would like to ask. Is there a difference between, oops, any other question? Wait, is there a difference between game localization and game translation, or is it the same thing using different terms? What do you think? There's also a term called localization specialist also. Like, do you think the three of them is the same, or what is the differences?
Yeah, localization specialist is really someone who's been working with localization for a long time and know the process inside out, the ins and outs of localization. And there's a difference because translation is a part is part of the localization process, right? So when you have a text and you translate it. But localizing is really researching all the steps that need to be made in order to release a product for a specific audience, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that includes voice acting, marketing, some marketing research, and the community research and things like that, so that you can make sure that your translation or localization really speaks to that particular audience, right? So localization involves other processes that are that go beyond a simple translation, let's say, and
Mm-hmm.
also involves other team members as well, other areas of expertise.
I think it's also clear now. And there was a one question that I would like to also ask. Do you play the games before or after translating? And if so, were there any games which you didn't enjoy but still translated it? And how was that experience if you have so, if you had?
Yeah, the sad reality of game localizations that you don't usually get to play the games.
Mm-hmm.
If you do have the chance to play it, you should do so before starting the translation, of course. And when you play, the main things to watch are screen space, the game mechanics, and the tone of the characters of the interface. And when you're playing it, you have to ask yourself some questions, such as how much free UI space does the game have? Are there any particular buttons or windows with very restricted space? And how does the game play? Which challenges does the player have to overcome? And what is the writing style? Who the main characters are, right? When you play the game after it has been translated, it's actually called localization quality assurance, which
Mm-hmm.
is a separate service that is usually carried out by another team of linguists, right? So it's a crucial part of localization to make sure the game text is well presented to the player, right? So the interface must fit the localized text within, and there can be, of course, no glaring context mistakes, which are called localization bugs in the industry, right? And
Mm-hmm.
these bugs are such as male name for female character, because you when you were translating, you didn't know who that character is. For example, an NPC, a non-player character named merchant. You don't know if that merchant is male or female, and
Mm-hmm.
then you use a word in your language with a gender mark that actually is the wrong gender for that character, right? So the localization quality assurance will play through the game and look at these characters, look at places in the games, items, and see if there's any kind of context mistakes, and of course interface mistakes, like I mentioned before. Um, you also asked me about translating games that I don't usually enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
That happens because yeah, I mean, yeah, especially after you've been translating for a time, maybe you get to choose where you work. But the truth
mhm,
is, if you need to make a living and having a steady income, you will take the job that comes to you, unless you really dislike it completely or you don't know about the topic, so you prefer to leave that to another specialist, right?
mhm,
But that happens, and from time to time, after some time, I mean, you just get used to it because it's your job, right? So you just have to try to make the most of it, and of course deliver the best you can. That said, of course, when you translate something that localize a game that speaks to you at a personal level, that you played as a child or that you were such a big fan right now, you you get inspired to go the extra mile, right?
mhm,
So to really deliver something to make the audience feel feel that that translation is really good, right? You just put yourself in the shoes of the audience and think,
mhm.
what would I like to see if I was if I was playing this game, which I'm a fan of, and it's translated. What am I expecting, right? So that's something you ask yourself.
Yeah, I think I mean it's a big part of being professional, I think, because I mean it does not always mean that you are going to translate or work on a thing that you really like. So I think it's a big um big thing to show that you are a professional if you are like doing your job well, if you even if you didn't like it. So I think it's also pretty important. And there's one long question, and I would like to just ask the main thing shortly. It talks about some companies says that I mean when they're looking for a like when they're hiring, they mostly look for like more closer people, like as on location. And since I mean Turkey generally is not always in the Europe or like America or anywhere, it's kind of hard for us to find a job as a freelancer. So, what is your suggestions as a freelancer, like how we can find a job on other countries except our country? Like, how do you think it's possible?
Uh, it's really hard to speak about to talk about the language pair English Turkish because I actually don't know about it.
Hmm.
But I would say most translation agencies work remotely, right? So it's really if you don't know any colleagues on LinkedIn, for example, that work for a remote translation agency, you can
Hmm.
start looking for agencies that people from other language pairs work in, right? Uh,
Hmm.
and do that thing I mentioned. Access their websites and see if they're recruiting, see if they work in your language pair, right? And if they do, chances are they will recruit you as a remote freelancer, right? So it's just it's really a matter of going out there and trying to look for them. And I know it can be really tough sometimes because you open that website and you have multiple information, you have a lot of things to really search, and
Hmm.
you can be lost. You can feel lost sometimes, but you really have to try to look for these agencies that are recruiting remote freelancers.
I think it was a pretty good answer. And I think we
Thank
have
you.
talked about job opportunities and job things so much. So let's get into the job, I think.
Sure.
So there was also two questions on the chat, and I was actually going to ask about this. I mean, since we are translators, we mostly work on a computer, and we are always using softwares, CAT tools, and different kind of programs, computer programs. So, as a game localizationist, especially as a game localizationist, what kind of tools do you use, and can you suggest like useful tools, website, etc., like any kind of helpful things for you? And I mean, I know that as I mean, you also you need to translate or enter the in-game codes, and you need to be careful about codes because when you write anything wrong, the whole code will be gone. So, what kind of things do you use?
Like you mentioned cat tools, right? Which are
Mm-hmm.
computer-assisted tools. I don't know how much the audience is familiar with it, so I'll just do a quick overview of that. Cat tools are software where you can upload an Excel file, a Word file, or other text-based file, and it really helps you to translate because they split the sentences in neat cells, and it registers the translations that have been made both by you or by your team, right? And they really speed up and help the translation process. And without the translation memories, glossaries, and search filters that these tools allow, it's really hard to keep track of your translation, to keep it consistent, especially when you're working with teams. And among the cat tools, my preferred is MemoQ, which I have been using for as long as I can remember, ever since I started translating. It's a paid tool, uh, like Trados, which is also very used,
Mm-hmm.
uh, extensively used in the industry. But many agencies work with free-to-use software cat tools as well, such as MemSource and Crowding. Okay. And other tools that you can use. Of course, you will need access to dictionaries, both in your source
Mm-hmm.
and target languages, as well as the synonyms dictionary, which really helps you to avoid repeating yourself or maybe using a cognate word that doesn't actually have the same meaning in your native language, right? I
Mm-hmm.
don't know how Turkish is with cognates with English. I don't know if there are words with similar root with a
Not
similar
at all.
root. So in Portuguese, there is quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Like they have roots in the Latin or Greek languages. So you have to use that dictionaries to avoid that kind of things. And there's actually a software to help you with that called Golden Dict, where you can upload dictionary files of all kinds. So you
Mm-hmm.
can highlight text in any window, be it your cat tool, an Excel file, a Word file, or a browser page. And then you press a hotkey with the highlighted word on it, and it opens a window with word definitions or even translation suggestions in case you have a glossary in your library, right? And I would also recommend time management tools
Mm-hmm.
if you feel like you you are unproductive or taking too long to work or with a lot of distractions. There's a tool called Toggle Track where you can define what you're working on right now, and then you
Mm-hmm.
press play and it starts counting the time that you are doing with that task. And if you use that with the Pomodoro method, I don't know if you are aware of that. It basically Pomodoro method is you put a timer of 25 minutes where
Mm-hmm.
you are focusing on your work, and then you rest for 5 minutes. You can get out of the computer, look at the window, or just distract yourself a bit, and then you get back to work for another 25 minutes. And if you use those two tools together, at least for me, it really has helped me a lot to stay organized and really focus on my work. And it also reduces the amount of mistakes you do because you make sure that when you work, you're actually focused on that work. So
Mm-hmm.
you'll be more aware of any mistakes that slip by.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard a lot of times
Oops.
about MemoQ, but unfortunately, I've never had a chance to use it. And as far as I know, MemoQ also shows the in-game codes, like if they are right or wrong, like if you did anything, any mistake. I think it also shows the codes, right? If it's like correct or not.
Yes,
And
yes. For
I think
example,
Trados do not have that thing, right?
no, it
Trados.
does, it does, it
Oh,
does,
it
it
does.
does.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not as proficient in Trados as well as much as MemoQ, but I know for a fact that you have those tags where you just copy one tag from the source text to the next. So, for example, in an Excel file, if you have an HTML code, right,
Hmm.
you have to select the text, copy it, and paste it on your target text. On MemoQ and Trados, and also the other free-to-use tools as well, such as MemSource and Crowdin. Those tags, they become sort of buttons that you just click or press a hotkey, and it's automatically copied to the target text, right? Um,
Hmm.
uh, Speaking about the difference between MemoQ and Trados, MemoQ has a very good quality assurance tool that when you press it, it really shows if you missed copying any tags or or if you added a white space where it doesn't exist in the source text. So it really helps to make your translation less error prone.
And since we're actually talking about cat tools, and it's kind of related with also technology, other than cat tools, how technology can help for improvement of game localization industry? Like, what do you think? I mean, nowadays we are always talking about uh, programs like Google Translate, Yandex Translate, and it's clear to see that they actually made a good step and they're translating pretty good actually. But when it comes to games, like when it came to games, it's really hard to say that you can really use game translation because it may it may show really differences. So except like Google Translation or some kind of programs like that, how technology can help.
Well, first of all, machine translation it's really helpful in a general sense, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it help us connect with people all around the world. You can, I don't know, open up Twitter and see what people in other languages are saying and things
Mm-hmm.
like that. But of course, when using it for game translation, it's much more trickier because we actually, as humans, have a lot of difficulties leading with context issues in games, because you don't know exactly where that button will appear in the game screen, or who is saying which dialogue and to whom they are saying that dialogue. So
Mm-hmm.
machine translation really, I don't see when it can actually replace a human if you're looking for good quality of localization, of course, right? But
Mm-hmm.
it has helped me in translation in particular, because I remember it actually happened this year. I had I was localizing a game from English, but it was originally written in Russian. So the Excel file with the context for all that information, for all the dialogue, for all the script, it was actually in Russian because it was not localized. So I used machine translation to translate that context, I could know what the context is of that phrase, and it was really helpful. Um, Aside from machine translation, I believe that technology can help with, for example, organizational tools such as platforms such as Trello, Jira, and Asana, because you can assign tasks for translators, you can check progress, and you can keep a centralized source of information for sending queries across teams, right? For example, you have something to discuss with the auto team, and you can just use those platforms to do that, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and it really brings teams together. Technology could also be used to improve the security of game builds, right? A lot of publishers, especially the larger publishers. They avoid sending game builds or providing versions so that translators can play for
Hmm.
security reasons because they fear it might be leaked. So maybe in the future there might be a way of providing those builds without any security concerns.
Hmm.
I also have dreamed dreamed about a software, and if there are any software developers out there watching me, you can tell me if that's viable or not. That is, you can, for example, you have this dialogue that you are translating, and you look for the codes of that dialogue, and you put that on a software, and the software will retrieve, for example, a screenshot of where that dialogue is played in the game.
Hmm.
I believe it would really help in a lot of ways, especially because it would make it would consume less time of developers because they need to answer questions of translators, right? So with a software
Hmm.
like that, you could just check context without having to send queries to the development team.
Yeah, I mean, we're right now living in 2022, and it's like definitely a technology era, and it's really hard to think about translation or localization is not going to have any benefits from technology. So I'm definitely agree with what you say, and I mean some translators are, I mean, I don't know in globally, but in Turkey, some people are afraid of technology or like machine translations. They're like, or even like the normal people, they are saying like there is nothing to do with translation. Machine translation does everything. So I mean, I'm also supporting the idea that we should be continue our way with technology by taking the benefits, and game localization should also be the same.
Sure.
And thanks for answering this question again. And I would like to just remind one thing. Since we are also giving certificates, you should fill the form on the chat, and then we will send it to your mails. Don't feel free to, I mean, fill the form. And my other question is going to be about the problems of being a game localizationist. Like, what is the hardest thing of being a game localizationist? And also, I can ask about the problems between Brazilian Portuguese and English. Like, what is the problems, differences that you see?
Sure. Definitely the hardest thing about the localizing games is lack of context. I always come back to this topic because it's really tough. It's really tough because a language has a lot of subtleties, both in the source language and the native language.
Hmm.
So perhaps the developer used a word that can have a lot of meanings in their languages, but in your language you need to find a word that is more specific, right? Less vague. So that's really tough, right? So
Hmm.
and most games won't provide you with a game build so you can play, and some of them, or maybe most of them too, do not provide reference files, such as a game design document describing quests, characters, or factions, or things
Hmm.
like that. So being a gamer really helps at that on cases such as these, because you know the different game genres out there that exist, so you can actually predict how certain mechanics function, right? So
Hmm.
what with your experience as a gamer or as a translator, you can like solve some of the riddles that will or puzzles that will come up during the translation. One thing that will certainly help you is string IDs. Most buttons, headers, and sentences in the game have an independent code to identify them, and
Hmm.
such codes are present in most localization kits, and they offer a hint about the context where they appear. So imagine an item named Frostbite Ring, right? The description of that item probably won't be near the name of the item.
Mhm.
Probably what your Excel file will look like is you have a list of names of all items, and at the end of the file, after the dialogue, after a lot of things, or maybe in a separate tab, you have the description of those names, right? So when you're translating this frostbite ring I mentioned, you have to look at this string ID I mentioned, which is probably included in the localization kit. And this string ID will probably say something, read something like ring 3 underline title, right?
Mhm.
So what it will do is you search the file for the ring 3 underline desk from for description, right?
Mhm.
And that's what will really help you. And for example, if you're translating other things, it maybe the string ID has an underline button, right? So you know that particular text is included in a button of the game, right? So
Mhm.
you adapt your localization accordingly.
Yeah, perfect. And so we are going to have the last questions, and there's two questions
Oh,
I would like to ask on the chat.
I'm sorry. You asked me about Portuguese and English localization too, right?
Yeah, you can
Translation.
also actually, yeah, you can also answer for that one. Then I can
Okay.
ask the questions on the chat. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
sorry. Yeah, I forgot to answer that.
Uh,
The main difficulties are, of course, text size and character gender,
mhm,
because in English, words usually have one or two syllables, while in Portuguese, they can easily have two, three, or even more syllables, right? And English is also a very plastic language, and that
mhm,
you can add multiple adjectives before a noun, and it still sounds good, right? So, for example, you have a dark-haired, authority-defying thunder wizard.
mhm,
That would probably require prepositions and clauses which do not exist in the English source text, right?
yeah,
And considering screen space is limited and designed with English in mind, it can be challenging to find solutions that fit both the character limit and the context, right? So you really have to find ways to work around that. And about the character gender mentioned, articles, adjectives, and nouns have no gender marks in English, right?
mhm,
Most of them. And when translating without proper reference material, you can't be sure that, for example, the merchant I mentioned before,
mhm,
you can't be sure if that merchant is male or female, right? I mean, in Portuguese, there is a gender neutral option for that. But suppose there isn't. Many other words don't have.
mhm.
You, in such cases, you have to send queries to the game developers. But it really breaks the pace of your work, right? Because you have to stop and do that and then come back. And sometimes the writers take a long time to answer, or maybe they don't answer at all. So that, that's definitely a challenge.
Yeah, I think it's also very important to always be in a contact with the game developers and always ask them about or have a feedback about the translation. Yeah, I think it's also pretty important to do. And there is one question about researching, actually. I mean, we know that also in our schools, they always teach us to have some research before we start a job or translation. So in the games, how is it working? Like, do you do background research of the game content before starting a project? Or if you do, how much time do you spend for it? And what do you mainly focus?
Okay. Uh, Research skills are a must for any translator,
Mm-hmm,
maybe especially for game translators. Because, for example, maybe you are translating a game from an established franchise like
mm-hmm,
DC or Marvel or D&D, right? If the client doesn't provide you with an official glossary, you must be prepared to look for previous official translators, because those franchises they have established fan base, and they are expecting some specific translations for heroes or villains, characters in general, or places. So you really have to do your research to really understand what that's like,
Mhm.
right? So I'd say you can't uh, unless there's absolutely no reference material and it's a completely new game, you have to research what that game is about to understand the most important characters and of course what is the genre of the game, right?
Mhm.
To see if to make any adaptations that are necessary.
And so for today, I'm going to ask my last question. And since we actually talk about also like background research, it's also create a question. What's your process when you are translating a game? Like, what's your rules? What do you do first? Do you have a mind mapping, mind plan, or how do you follow? How do you do? How do you start? Um,
Sure. Uh, I always want to make sure the game text is clear and relevant for the specific audience of that game.
mhm,
And to achieve that, you have to truly understand the game mechanics and choose an appropriate translation and make it consistent throughout every file and batch that comes in. Right. So for big games, you have to you won't receive all the files in a go. You receive actually batches, and the project may take up months depending on its size. So you really have to be organized to keep the translation consistent, right? So that the player really knows how the mechanics function. You can't choose different translations for the
mhm,
same thing, for the same mechanics in the game, right? Um, and you also want to learn as much as possible of things like about things like the age rating of the game, right? And the game's genre, as I mentioned. So if it's a farming game, maybe you should go for a colloquial and accessible register, right? But if it's a medieval strategy game with
mhm,
historical themes, then you should probably choose a formal or maybe even literary approach to that game, right? Because that's the kind of player that will be playing it, right? So that's the player really is your final client there, and they are the ones who will actually review your translation, and those reviews will be seen by the publisher. So
mhm.
if the audience is happy with the translation, the publishers will be happy too.
Great. So. Uh, I mean, I'm done with my questions, and to be honest, it was very perfect to ask these questions and have the perfect answers from you too. And I
Thank you.
was very eager to do this, like, and I'm so glad that we finally do this after months. And I would like to say thank you for everybody who attended to the event, and especially to you for your answers. Um, I would like to remind again, don't forget to fill the form to get the certification. And lastly, to everybody, I would like to ask, we want to take a screenshot for our Instagram page. So my friend will take a picture. So feel free to open your webcams or close if you don't want. So, uh, okay, when everybody is ready, we will take a picture. So you can just give a pause. Yeah, I think we got the photos right now. Uh, and I would like to say thank you so much again.
Thank you everyone for attending. It's been really amazing. It was actually my first live or Q&A session, so I was just impressed by how many people actually attended. And thank
Yeah.
you. I hope I've been able to tell you a bit more about how game localization works. And if you want, you can reach me out on LinkedIn, ask other questions, or just chat about anything. My name is Diego Perez, and see you there.
See you, everybody. feel free to text or connect with any of us. And till the next event, take care of you. Stay safe.
See you.